So this is from the book of Titus, and Titus was a young man, and he needed to choose leaders. And we're right before an election, and we all have the responsibility to choose leaders. And so he needed to go to a difficult situation in Crete, full of Cretans, people that weren't great, to choose amongst the not great people to lead, okay? This is a different culture. It's a difficult culture. It's a difficult situation. And there's young Titus left by Paul on this island to figure it out. But honestly, the only way you learn sometimes is just to figure it out. So Titus chapter 1, verse 5, I'm going to read through verse 16. Hear the word of the Lord. This is Paul writing to Titus. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order. Say order. And appoint, that means choose, and appoint elders, which are spiritual leaders, which are leaders of any sort over a church, in every town as I directed you. Then he says in verse 6, if anyone, so not assuming anyone was, but he said, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers, and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. When you don't have good examples or people to guide you, you can go to the book of Timothy, the book of Titus, men and women, but particularly for men, you can go there and see this is what makes a man in God's eyes. This is the kind of men the Lord himself says, I can build on that. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? All right, verse 10. And then he starts talking about these Cretans. Say Cretans. For there are many who are insubordinate. You can be fired for that, by the way. You ever heard of somebody being fired for insubordination? There are many who are worthy to be fired. Empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. They must be silenced. So spiritual leadership calls for people to take strong stands and actually draw hard lines and say, silence. That's what the word's showing us here, silence. Since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. One of the Cretans, Paul's like getting real specific. He's saying stuff about some of the folk he know. Some of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans, that's a whole group of people he's called to minister to, right? These Cretans. Cretans are always liars, they're evil beasts, and they're lazy gluttons. These aren't wonderful folks. These are not people that you're like, oh, try to be like them. The Cretans are liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons, and this is who Titus had to choose from. Titus, go choose from the evil beasts, lazy gluttons, and always liars. Are you getting this? This testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They're detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. This is the tension that young Titus finds himself in, where Paul left him to find some leaders out of this bunch. Titus had to select leaders from the Cretans. And there's some kind of pause here on Titus's part. Titus isn't getting with the program. Titus is going too slow for Paul. Titus is not doing what he was put there to do, and Paul's letter was written to tell Titus to get going. Titus, you're wasting your time in Crete. I need you somewhere else. You need to appoint leaders and select leaders from the Cretans. That's why the language of Paul is, that's why I left you in Crete, he says. I left you in Crete to do something that is difficult. And so I think what we can gain from here is that for Titus, not making a decision about who will lead was going to be catastrophic for the future church of Crete. You following me today? These Cretans, they were mercenaries, which means they were soldiers for hire. The Cretans would be fighting for one side, and somebody would say, I'll give you a $5 an hour raise. And they'd turn around and go after the folk that had hired them the first time. Like, these are not loyal folks. They were full of violence. They were full of sexual corruption. And because of this, the lazy gluttons and liars and the other beasts they called them, they were ruining the churches, and Paul was hearing about it, but he had left Titus there to do something about it, but Titus wasn't moving fast enough for Paul. And he needed Titus to have the guts to appoint leaders within the church. And when you don't have strong and capable leadership in the church, I can attest to the fact that evil will come in and try to fill the void. Always. And so these people bragged that Zeus, Zeus like Thor but with lightning, that Zeus was from Crete. And they idolized Zeus, and they treated him, of course, as a god. And what Zeus would do is lie, cheat, steal, do all kinds of terrible things. And that's why when Paul started to talk to these people about God, in verse 2, he tells them, I represent the God who does not lie. Because Zeus, the god that they formerly worshiped, was a big-time liar. And so Titus is trying to lead this church well. It's not going well because you're getting letters from Paul. Like if I was guiding the courageous church and I got a letter from Paul, I would realize I probably have some work to do because Paul's busy, but Paul took time to sit and write me a letter telling me to get with the program. That's what Titus is feeling right here. And this is a book written to a son. It's 3 short chapters. It packs a punch. It doesn't give any flowery greetings. It gets right to the point. He starts by saying, I left you there to take care of business, and you're not acting like a businessman. And so Paul was able to talk to Titus like this because Titus trusted Paul's heart for him. There's very few qualifying statements. This was not a letter to a customer. It was a letter to a son because Paul was a spiritual father to Titus, and he's writing out of love and care for Titus and also writing out of love and care for the church that Titus is pastoring there in Crete. And he's recognizing that all these people, I tell you what, the worst time of my life in school was when we studied that dang Greek mythology. Oh my goodness, I wanted to take a pencil and stab myself in the forehead. I hated Greek mythology. Maybe you love it, but I hated it. And it wasn't because I believed the Bible so much back then. I just hated all the weirdness of it. And these people were ate up with it. It was like going to like a Greek mythology convention or people that do fantasy and be like, let me tell you about Jesus. And they'd be like, let me tell you about Zeus. And so that word Cretan comes from the word kretizo, which meant to be a liar or a lazy beast. Matter of fact, when they wanted to insult somebody, they'd call them a kretizo, which means you're acting like the people that live at the Isle of Crete. And so Titus was the first real pastor in Crete. He was the first bishop there. And I feel like this need to choose, this need to work through the muddied culture, this need to deal with a less than desirable decision-making ability is where we're at right now in America, and it's where we're at here in the church. And so Titus evidently had problems finding qualified people. I can see Titus reading this letter from Paul and turning red, being like, oh crap, I know Paul's mad at me. I know I need to get moving. But I can see him reading that letter and saying, Paul, none of these people even remotely match the qualifications that you're asking me to fulfill here. You feel that? Like, none of these people are what you're saying, Paul. You left me with a bunch of Cretans. And Paul, if this was so easy, why did you hightail it out of here so fast and leave me to deal with it? But that didn't change the assignment. And that doesn't change our assignment as believers first and as Americans second. It's evident that Titus was not getting this job done, and it wasn't like he didn't know why he was left there. Titus knew, I've been left to appoint leadership. And so this letter was either to give him like public affirmation so he could read it out loud so people would get behind him, or it was a private kick in the pants to get moving. But it was one or the other. Titus might have been stuck in the paralysis of analysis and needed a not-so-subtle nudge from Paul to make a decision about leadership for the future so the church could move forward. This delay and reluctance in decision-making seems to be true today when Time magazine just reported that 32 million Christians aren't voting in this election. 32 million Christians are not voting in this election. If we do that, we give the future our kids will live in to folks who don't know or love Jesus. And Paul wants Titus to go to Crete and make the hard decisions about character and trustworthiness with people that don't exhibit either. He didn't appoint Titus to go and win a popularity contest among the Cretans. He sent them there. He sent Titus there to do what was most right. And that's what Titus had to do. Let me read you verse 5 again so you understand the tension. He said, "This is why I left you in Crete. This is why you're here. Don't think you're there for a vacation. You're there for a reason. You're on mission so that you might put what remained into order." So there definitely been a big tumult. There'd been a big disruption already. He wanted him to put what was remaining in order and then appoint leaders, choose leaders in every town as I directed you. And then he says, if anyone's above reproach, figure it out. Like, if Christian character alone was our goal for selecting a president, we would have chosen, and America would have chosen, Ben Carson. Because in looking at all the people, he's the most outwardly faithful, and I don't know the man, Christian I ever saw. He even seems to be qualified to be a pastor in a local church as far as I can tell. But just like it seemed in Crete, nothing on the ballot this year is qualified to lead the church of Jesus. We're choosing from Cretans. And just as hard and fast a take as that was, understanding that J.D. Vance came to faith post-marriage and not knowing the family dynamic or even knowing what the future looks like for them, we need to pray for all of our leaders, and we would never want them to ever divorce. But even J.D. Vance, who seems to be the most outwardly faithful in his confession and who seems to genuinely love the Lord, even J.D. Vance is a Catholic married to a lovely woman who worships a false god as a Hindu. His Hindu wife led him to Catholicism. They have merged their faiths, seemingly, by their own confession to raise their children. This is completely unbiblical. I'm not judging their future. I'm just saying that these things are not ideal, and I get it. Not attacking, just speaking truth about our faith's focus. Jesus nor his word allows for such arrangements. And this would be so strange for someone who believes the Bible, not wanting them to get divorced, just saying nothing is ideal and nothing lines up with the characteristics the Bible lays out for spiritual leadership. But we're not voting for pastors. It's a much lesser role spiritually. We're voting for presidents and vice presidents. And so, like Titus, we need to analyze the conditions and know we must do what is right. We can't afford to confuse ourselves, and we can't afford to make no decision, and we can't afford to be among the 32 million Christians who aren't voting this year. Isaiah 5:20 says this, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Woe to those who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Woe to those who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Look, we can't be confused or deceived, and we can't be reluctant to make leadership decisions this year. And it seems as though young Titus was a bit reluctant to do the work. And Paul left him there to figure it out. Nobody's coming to rescue Titus. I'm sending a letter. Jesus is no longer bodily presently with you. I, Paul, have left. You'll need to choose from the Cretans. Look at your neighbor and say, choose from the Cretans. It's safe to say we can't make an election choice for president and vice president from Paul's list to Titus. No one on the ballot is qualified. But voting isn't a love letter to your beloved. It's hiring somebody to do a job. It's making a choice of what's best. It's making a choice of what seems to be best in alignment with biblical values. Personalities and lifestyles aside, platform over personality, what has their past behavior told us about this candidate? In 1917, the Orthodox Church of Russia had a meeting. For several weeks, they met about the theology in the church, and on the last day, there was a huge fight amongst the Russian Orthodox Church over the color of their preaching robes. These guys are over here going, I'm working on my Russian accent I didn't practice. Russian. Flugen. No, I'm going Norwegian here. I don't think I do a good Russian accent. But there's the Russians over here saying, we want the blue robes. And the guys over here yelling, I want the fuchsia. And they got in a big fight over the dang color of their robes. True story, 1917. 5 blocks down the street at the same time from this goofy battle over what color preaching robes we're going to wear, Vladimir Lenin was sharing the vision of Marxism, sharing the vision of communism and how to overthrow the current Russian government. And within a few months, Lenin overthrew that government, and he brought in communism, and the entire nation adopted atheism, and they outlawed Christianity while the church was fighting over the color of their robes. And that shut down the impact of the gospel in Russia for 70 years. Can I tell you there's an agenda right now in America? It's a demonic agenda to take away the freedom of religion, take away the freedom of speech, take away the sanctity of life, the natural God-given birth gender of humanity, to use government-funded schools to indoctrinate children with an antichrist mindset and worldview. We are standing at a crossroads, and we can't afford not to make a dang decision. I've probably told this story before, but a member of a church in Germany during World War II, during the time of the Holocaust, told a tragic story. A railroad track, this is the story, a railroad track ran behind our small church, and each Sunday morning we could hear the whistle from the distance and then the clacking of the wheels moving over the track. We became disturbed when one Sunday we noticed cries from the train as it passed by. We grimly realized that the train was carrying Jews. They were like cattle in those cars. You know they were going to Auschwitz. They were going to Warsaw. They were going to Poland. They were going to the gas chambers for mass extermination. Week after week, the train whistle would blow while we were in church, and we would dread to hear the sound of those wheels clacking because the Jews would begin to cry out to us as they passed by our church. It was so terribly disturbing. We could do nothing to help these poor, miserable people, yet their screams tormented us. We decided the only way to keep from being so disturbed by the cries was to start singing our hymns louder. And so as the trains would go by with people on a death march, the church would just sing louder and try to stick their fingers in their ears and act like nothing was going wrong. God forgive us if we think we can be like that, to argue over goofy, to try to deny reality, when I can tell you that as a leader of a church in America, I feel like this same thing is knocking at the door. Move forward to the current time. The slaughter of the unborn continues at 62 million to date with no end in sight. Courageous, we can't be caught singing louder to avoid hearing the silent rail car of death of the unborn. It is not something we can be passive about. We have to make a decision. And the federal overturning of Roe versus Wade has made us now responsible for abortion in our own state. Did you hear that? It's not a done deal. It's on us. And they're going to keep putting this on the ballot over and over and over again, trying to legalize the murder of the unborn in our nation. In our state. There's sadly people that love the ability to abort the next generation more than they love any other issue. 32 to 40 million Christians allegedly don't vote. That is not an option here. I'm asking you to not be like Titus and make a decision amongst the Cretans. And we need to vote no on Amendment 3. Here's the things that it does, and I want you to understand it, and this is why you need to vote no on Amendment 3. Number one, it legalizes abortion in Missouri for the entire 40-week term of a pregnancy, up to the moment of birth. Number two, it adds the phrase pregnant person instead of woman to the Missouri Constitution. 3, it removes parental notifications and consent requirements allowing minors to undergo an abortion without informing their parents or guardians. 4, it allows taxpayer-funded abortions in Missouri. 5, it prevents women from suing if they or their baby are harmed during pregnancy or during an abortion. 6, I think I got so fired up I said taxpayer-funded twice. We need to vote no on Amendment 3. And we don't need to lack a stomach for this. Titus got paralyzed about making decisions. I'm fine. I'm not paralyzed. And we shouldn't be either. Christians seem to be so eager to make an impact in Hollywood, and an impact in entertainment, and an impact in the arts, and an impact in the business world. But when it comes to politics or government, people get squeamish and tired, squeamish and quiet, and that is not where we should be. We need to be willing to reach out to the Hollywood stars, if any of them exist. I guess maybe Branson would be our closest deal here. We need to be okay going after people that chase the spotlight. But when it comes to biblical values related to voting and politics, people don't want me to say a dang word. I'm going to stop saying dang right now, last time. We hesitate, or you want something different. But honestly, this is what really matters today, right now. The same Jesus who told his followers to pay taxes would have the same response to Christians who are contemplating not voting in this election. It's our responsibility to take part in the civic duties of the nation where we live, and to ignore them is to miss out on the God-given influence we've been allowed to have. We should vote. The Great Commission in Matthew 28 instructs us to go and teach all nations. In Psalm 115, David says, "The highest heavens belong to the Lord, but the earth he has given to humanity." It's ours to make a difference in. Solomon reminds us in Proverbs 29 that when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, people groan. In Acts 5, the apostles declare we must obey God more than men. Throughout American history, the church has been on the forefront of developing good in the culture. The first hospitals, the church. The best colleges, the church. Even animal welfare charity was started by the church. Adoption agencies and orphanages were started by the church. And so, we need to have a stomach for it. Esther was used by God to change the direction of a nation. Joseph was used by God to change the direction of a nation. And if we sit back and make no decisions of selection like Titus seemed to be doing, we can't assume that our families will be untouched by what may come. The church was born to shape the direction of nations, and now is the time for our voice and our actions to be raised. And the faith that does not engage with the social order of things will soon find that the godless and those opposed to God are more than ready to engage with it, and not in a way that helps us. During COVID, I'll never forget this as long as I live, we were at the North Campus, locked in with 12 to 15 people as we were allowed, recording a video message for Sunday. And while I'm preaching, somebody was circling our property. They called the police, and while I'm preaching, 2 police officers were knocking on the door, asking to come in and inspect what we were doing as I'm preaching the word to a camera. I will never forget that. I will never forget that. Did the cop want to do that? No. But that's the spirit of the age that was being forced upon us. We were in compliance. There was no problem. But I will never forget the people that caused that. Last month, in Springfield Public Schools, beginning of October it was, I had people in the building tell me that in an elementary school here in Springfield Public Schools, a man dressed as a woman served as a substitute teacher, demanding the children call him ma'am, confusing the children, disrupting the learning environment. I will not do anything to further that agenda. Springfield. Been here 25 years. Know lots of people. I don't say things that aren't the truth. Ronald Reagan said if we lose freedom here, there's nowhere else left to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Now, we're a part of another kingdom, folks, and we're going to thrive. We're going to thrive no matter what government does. But when we have the opportunity to say, this is a preferred direction, we need to take that opportunity. And I'm not going to be lectured by people that don't know what a woman is. I'm not going to be lectured by people that think gender's a construct. I'm not a social construct. I'm not going to be lectured by people that think abortion is health care. I'm not going to be lectured by people that think borders are mean. I'm not going to be lectured by people who thinks the nuclear family doesn't matter. And I'm not going to believe in or trust people that tried to shut the church down while yelling at me. We have to trust the science, when the science had already proven that this wasn't as strong as what you thought it was. And I know a lot of people were confused, and I know they told us millions of people would die and all this. I get it. I'm not going to select people that think Israel should be erased. I'm not going to select people that feel like America is not important. I am not going to select people that lean into and embrace the principles of Marxism and then communism, because that is a vote against Christianity, church. That is a vote against Christianity. We'll thrive, we'll go underground, we'll do whatever we got to do. But why would we invite that into our world? We need less government, not more. And I'm not voting for role models for my children. I'll be that for mine, and you be that for yours. Because when we think government has all the answers, the bigger the government is, the smaller the citizen becomes. And that infringes on our religious liberties, our freedom of speech, all of the rights that we've been blessed to have. America is the largest Christian nation in the world. And these things are important. And I'm going to have a clean conscience before you and before my grandchildren when I look at the future, no matter what it looks like, and says, and I would be able to say, I did my part, I said my piece, so that we would not be caught in the valley of indecision.